this morning. I'm Ariel Evans. I am the faculty chairperson of Pace University Seidenberg's Cybersecurity Certificate Program. I can't talk because I haven't had enough coffee this morning, so please forgive me. And I want to welcome you to our cloud security panel. Today's panel is going to be moderated by Jim Mottola, so I'm going to hand the magic wand over to Jim, and we will get started.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Ariel, and thank you for everybody for participating early this morning for those on the East Coast. I'd really like to just some rules of the road here as I was talking about with the panelists before. I kind of look at this as a kind of a soccer game or a football match, depending on what your perspective is. You know, we've got some great panelists here. I'm going to kick the ball out to them once in a while. They should be kicking the ball back and forth to each other, asking, you know, going back and forth. This is a topic that we could probably spend an entire day on, honestly. But you've got some great panelists here, and I'm going to try to guide them through. We've got some questions and some topics we'd like to touch on, mainly around security, but we're going to get started, you know, talking about the basics of a cloud and evolve from there. So without further ado, and I don't want to fail to mention that, please, if you have a question, type it in the new Q&A box that WebEx is now provided. Ariel will be looking at those questions. She may insert a question into a conversation or just hold off to the very end to pose your question. All right, so with that, I'm going to start introduction of our panelists, and let's start with Les. Les, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and cloud?
Yes, my name's Les Correa. I work for Estee Lauder. My primary role is a makeup artist, and on the side, I'm an architect, director of architecture, engineering, and ops, and transitioning to AppSec. We are, as a company, moving, digitizing, and transforming into the cloud rapidly, and we work with various tools to protect ourselves. Thank you.
Great, thank you. David? All right, I think we may need to unmute him.
Yeah, good morning, fighting the mute button here. So David Afinoyu, I'm with AT&T, more specifically with Warner Media. Anything that you guys are watching on HBO Max, you hear, CNN, also Xandr Big Data, if anyone is aware of what AT&T is doing with the ads out there. That's my expertise. I own the cloud practice. But I have my hands in pretty much anything that it's across the board with security. So I guess today we're gonna touch more cloud. On the side, I'm also leading the Coast Guard Auxiliary Cybersecurity Task Force for all the maritime ports in New York. I'm a former naval signal intelligence officer, so that's my side job, and many other hobbies that we can maybe talk another time.
Sounds good. Thank you, David. Vikas?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Vikas Malhotra. I'm in Microsoft's cloud product team, specifically in M365. I've been working in the cloud area for past 11 plus years now, out of its about 15 or 16 years of existence. And I've been working in various areas, including security, compliance, regulations, privacy, etc. And essentially, it's more importantly from the perspective of how customers could assess cloud services as they go about adopting cloud services. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vikas. And Ulf.
Hi, guys. So my background is IBM. I used to work 20 years at IBM in research and development, mainly in the security space. I've been after that doing a couple of startups in the security and cloud area. I'm now the chief security strategist at Protegrity that I founded 25 years ago. And I've been developing products in different areas: data protection, encryption key management, Casper cloud security providers. And I'm very excited about where cloud is going and the security issues. No, I would say security challenges we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let's kick off with a kind of a foundational question. I'm going to put this to Les. You know, what is the cloud, and what are some of the general benefits that you see in using the cloud?
Wow, that's a big one. Well, the cloud, by the way, is not a new concept. It's just abstracting areas. There are several models and characteristics that make the cloud very attractive, such as, characteristic being it's on demand, it's self-service, it's rapid elasticity, you can measure it, and so on and so forth. But it's the abstraction layer that makes it better. And there are several models that go around with it. And the models that most people will be aware of are what we call IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service. That's mainly to do with what system admins do, like in traditional days in terms of hosts and so on and so forth. So storage and platforms and service management, compute, and so on and so forth. The next level, higher up on the abstraction, is platform as a service. It's things like middleware, which sits upon the IaaS, and it's mainly developers that build upon things. So development and testing, business intelligence, databases, and so on and so forth. And the last level, which most people are actually used to, is the consumers in general, so the customers and so on. And those are the applications that sit on top of it. So sales, billing, ERP, Office 365, and as things that people know. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. No, thank you. That's a great summary. Very concise. It is a very broad question, so thank you. So, you did mention hosting service. So, I'm going to just go down the list and ask, David, what's the difference from, I guess, from the cloud and I guess from a hosting service?
Yeah, hosting service, and again, speaking to what Les was just mentioning, right? Infrastructure as a service versus SaaS versus any other usability, I will say, of the cloud as a hosting. Most of us, I guess, on the call here, unless anyone is working for AWS mostly, and of course Microsoft or IBM, but hosting is that underneath layer that hosts a ton of applications that we are leveraging on a daily basis internally. I can speak to some of those, like Microsoft 365, Slack for communication purposes, Salesforce, right, for CRM, and many others. And that hosting environment has many challenges when it comes to security, because security is a shared responsibility when it comes to cloud. And we want to make sure that the concept of who is in charge with protecting our own data doesn't necessarily fall on the hosting, right, owner only, but we have all the security controls and everything it takes in place to own that part of the shared responsibility between the hosting company and the user. And again, there are many tools. There's an entire stack of technologies and security controls that can be leveraged within that practice that we can speak to here in probably in a minute. But that's pretty much what makes the difference, right, between the hosting environment and the user and world. That it's a very holistic, and it's always, or most of the time, at least in my case, what I worked in the past and currently, it's a hybrid an environment that has to be tackled from different approaches. You've seen just recently about Twitter and other big cases, right? That accounts were taken over, and everybody was expecting that Twitter is the hosting company, right, for that cloud SaaS at least service, which isn't the case. Most of the time, social engineering, human errors, and those are the factors that are impacting the real life. or that of the life cycle of the data that travels from one point to another.
It doesn't seem that the cloud is immune from human error, and I think you brought up a really good point about security and to a certain extent compliance and responsibility. And I want to ask Vikas this question about really how within those different models in the cloud, where are some of the issues that you see in contracting and auditing? How does that kind of play into the first, I guess, layer of some risk mitigation?
Yeah. James, one thing I would just like to add to what David and Les said before is that while hosting can be seen as an underlying layer of the cloud services, I think there is also a very key difference between the cloud services and hosting from a consumer perspective. Cloud services, which have kind of evolved in the last 15 or 16 years, are more or less, some form of a standardization that the cloud service providers have been trying to achieve at a very mass scale out there. Prior to that, hosting has existed out there, to provide enterprise services, and it has been the key difference between hosting and the cloud services is that hosting was very much like made to order, think of as a boutique kind of a setup that a customer would require a hoster to do on their behalf, probably in different data center, but it is not defined as a very standardized service as such. Cloud, on the other hand, is sort of like a mass scale production of a very standardized service that is being driven out there. Now, given that difference and how consumers would consume it, there are certain things that happen right at the contracting phase. It's when you're talking to a service provider for obtaining the cloud services, the contracting process itself is supposed to be driven in a very standardized format. There are very standardized feature sets that are available. As far as the assessment of those features are concerned, that is supposed to be carried out in very standardized format that applies to the compliance and the regulations, and as well as from the security standpoint as well. While on the hosting standpoint, in the contracting phase itself, the consumer or the enterprise may want all sorts of bells and whistles to be put in the contract so that the hoster actually defines that environment according to the very specific needs of that particular enterprise. And that leads to a totally different direction where, not only the contract is very, very boutique or very specific to that particular situation, but also the features and the controls that are being put inside that particular environment become very unique to that particular environment. So as far as the assessment is going to be done, so that is going to vary as well between the cloud and the hosting environment in that scenario.
Yeah, and I think I want to stay on this question because it is one of the topics we talked about. And then we'll go back, but how can a customer assess cloud services? What parameters? And I'm gonna, and I'll throw this to you because, but if you want to talk about that, but I think this is a big deal. That's a big issue.
Yeah. So it depends upon various parameters. Essentially, what I have observed in my career, I've been dealing with many customers who have been trying to assess the cloud as such. And then when customers come in, there are a variety of people with different roles within the company who want to assess the cloud, and their parameters of assessment and why they would approve going to the cloud or not is going to differ. So, for example, while there may be a CEO or the CFO of a company, and they may be looking at it as a way on how they could improve their end user experience or their organizational experience, or CFO may want to save cost compared to whatever environment they have today. But on the other hand, if it is a regulated industry and there is probably a compliance manager or a compliance team, they would be looking at it as, whether the cloud can meet the same sort of policy or the regulatory requirements or not as they move to the cloud compared to their on-premises environment. So the parameters are going to differ, but generally I would just go about like 5, 6 parameters over here. So one is obviously the cost that customers look at. They look at generally there is a change in the cost structure. They might be doing a very capitalized kind of investment. In the on-premises environment, it changes when you go to the cloud to more of an operational basis. There's always also a short-term versus long-term investment, that comes into play. Second is, what are the end user benefits the company is going to derive? Are there going to be any experience benefits that customers would see? So from a Office 365 perspective, for example, the company may have only been able to afford maybe a small amount of mailbox size, for all the time because there's a storage cost associated with it. When they go to the cloud, they get a standardized big size and whatnot. So that leads to changes in experiences and whatnot. What are the organizational benefits? If there is any cultural improvements that would be derived, we talk about DevOps model, for example, and things like that. So whether that can be instituted in a better fashion when company moves to the cloud versus on premises. Then there are other parameters like, the company would want to probably look at the cloud providers background itself, from the financial perspective. If the whole infrastructure and the data has to be put in the cloud infrastructure, whether the cloud provider can actually support it in the long term, do they have a financial standing to do that or not? Sure. Also, the reputation of the cloud provider matters. What is the standing in the cloud from the security in the market, essentially from the security perspective or the compliance perspective. So there is a whole reputation question out there. And then, the companies would also look at, whether the cloud provider is essentially being transparent, because there is an aspect of, moving this data to the cloud. And when they move their infrastructure to the cloud, they start thinking of okay, this is going to go into a black box and I don't have any control of this environment anymore, which I used to have in the on-premises environment. So this aspect of transparency of a cloud service provider comes into place as well. How much transparency a cloud service provider can provide, and that leads to assessments and auditing, etc., and whatnot. And the last thing is, I believe, the cloud service. There are a variety of models, as Les and David said. The IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. But then you look at different models. Each of these cloud services are trying to provide some sort of a service, and from a service standpoint, the customers would want to see if there are appropriate features that are aligned with their organizational needs present in the cloud or not, whether there are controls present in the cloud or not, and whether these features and controls can help manage the appropriate security and compliance of the cloud or not. So these are the 6, 7 parameters I think the companies look at.
No, thank you. That was extremely thorough and easy to understand. I mean, I probably know less about cloud than most anything else. I mean, it sounds like a very complicated topic, and it's always evolving and changing. And I think you touched upon some of the responsibilities between the service provider and the customer within the cloud environment. I'm going to kind of throw Ulf a double question here. That being part of it, right? The responsibilities distributed between the service provider and the customer. But really, I think it all comes down to, Ulf, when you talked about this, is the protection of the data, right? How can those roles and responsibilities, really, address what is the focus of our panel, which is the security?
Yeah, it's becoming more and more important. It's all about the data and the user. And I think what we see in the current security climate is that data is getting regulated. It's more and more about data privacy. The criminals are attacking our data. And I think, as we mentioned before here, with cloud, there's a shared responsibility model. And my view is that shared responsibility is no responsibility. So what is very clear in the responsibility model is that the cloud provider do not care about your data. They may say, well, we encrypt the data, blah, 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 but they are not responsible for your data. Read the contract. So in the shared responsibility model, you have a middle area where you have applications and other parts of the infrastructure where there can be some shared responsibility, depending on the cloud model that you are using. If it's a software, infrastructure, or platform as the cloud model. So going back to data, I said it's all about data privacy. We see so many new laws, new legislation in United States. They are coming up after the California CCPA. About 12 states have privacy legislations coming, and many of them are mimicking the California legislation, and that is a very broad data privacy legislation, a little bit similar to GDPR in Europe, but it's broader. GDPR in Europe, it's only addressing what we call PII, identifiable information. A little bit similar to HIPAA. The HIPAA 18 identified 18 items as identifiable: name, IP address, and phone number, and so. But CCPA is much broader. CCPA in California is saying any information that can be possibly linked to you should be protected and regulated. Very broad. So let's talk about data privacy. There are standards. There are international standards, ISO standards for de-identification and data privacy. That is a good framework for understanding exactly what can I do, what techniques can I use, how are they different. So I can map that to GDPR and CCPA and understand, okay, I'm using standard-based data protection. And we should remember, if you collect data, you are liable for that data. You may share the data, but you are liable. You need to be compliant. You need to make sure that the third party that you are sharing that data with is compliant, and that you have the opt-in from the individual that you collected data from. You need to have an opt-in. And it's all about, it comes down to separation of duties, as always with security. So the big question is, where is the encryption key? Who can access the encryption key? In case of a breach, where is the encryption key potentially exposed? Is it in the cloud, or do I actually have control as the user, cloud user? And then we have legal actions, subpoenas, and so governments coming in. Can they get the encryption key from the cloud provider? Or do you keep the encryption key? So the cloud provider cannot give the authorities the encryption key to decrypt the data, or they cannot give them clear text. So there are a couple of interesting aspects in cloud data and responsibilities, and it's getting more and more interesting with the new legislation coming up.
Great. So, thank you very much. One of the things we did, we kind of kicked around is CASB, right? So I'm gonna kick this into the center and let someone take the CASB question, because this is something that I think is relatively new, and we're talking about enforcing security policies. So any takers on the CASB question?
I can, well, I can start off.
Go ahead.
One can go into a lot of detail, but I'll tell you that because we had a journey about 3 years ago, actually a little bit over 3 years ago, where we were evaluating as we transformed. One of the challenges in the environment in general is to manage what is your applications in the cloud. Now, there are aspects of applications, right? Some things I'll use some terminology and then just to get a level playing field. You have sanctioned applications, meaning a company owns these applications like Office 365 and what have you. And then you have unsanctioned applications where there are applications that the company doesn't have. It's probably shadow IT, for example. That's a term used where people just use things because they were waiting for permissions and they just did it. And then you have this whole other aspect of personal applications. Like you can have Office 365. I'm using Office 365 as an example, okay? But you could use that for PAS, IS, and SAS, and so on and so forth. But you have the same thing for your suppliers, your partners, who have their own instances of Office 365 that you don't have control over. And you have your own personal versions of these Office 365 as well. So how do you manage that? Now, to deal with the sanctioned part is the easy part, and the shadow IT perhaps. Within the environment, there are many ways of connecting to a CASB is nothing more, if you look in a perspective, is nothing more than a proxy, if you will, to those applications in the cloud or service models in the cloud. So what it does is whatever people try to go to, it goes through that proxy wherein policies are set, and you can do or cannot do, check for compliance, check for data leakage, and so on and so forth, and go there. Now, the ways of integrating within the environment, first of all, to find out shadow IT, typically within CASBs, what you do is you merge with your firewall logs, all your egress point logs to find out all the applications being used. So you don't need any agents or anything of that sort. It's very passive, so you start discovering stuff. But in terms of the CASB itself, for the sanctioned applications, you have an API integration. So in other words, you as a company can say, hey, whenever I want to manage Office 365, I want to manage Salesforce, you write that permission such that whenever somebody touches, it's best known for, it's agentless. And basically, the cloud app calls back the CASB proxy, if you will, or the CASB polls. So that CASB, whoever you have to use as a CASB, has permissions and gets information from those sanctioned applications. But you don't not have control over personal and your partners. So the API stuff can only work with those applications that are sanctioned. And it's almost not real time because sometimes it could have already just happened, and therefore you can do things with it based on policy. There's another concept which is actually the most popular, and it's getting much more popular, and for many other reasons, is the forward proxy. So this time, for the most part, you can put an agent is the most popular method of doing it. You put an agent on your endpoint, and so anything traffic going in and out, you can trap the sanctioned as well as unsanctioned stuff. So because now everything that's coming from that endpoint is discovered, whether you're in your network in the company or you're outside, it still goes through that proxy. And you get that information. And that you can get the most depth of information. There's another concept called reverse proxy, but I won't delve into that, but it's for kind of IoT. Traditionally, it's being used. There are many use cases, and I'll pass it on to my other colleagues on the panel if they have to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what David has to say. I mean, I mean, he's pretty focused in the security space and in the public and the private sector, and is CASB something that, I guess that we're looking to address these cloud, service risks, policy enforcement, regulation, compliance, or is there another model out there that kind of like what Les was saying that is more efficient?
So just to clarify a point here, right? In addition, within CASB and within the entire security portfolio across the board, there are two main functions, right? There is the monitoring piece of it, which is gaining visibility into what happens within the network, and there is the other component, which is the enforcement, right? So I want to make sure that we separate those because they are not necessarily always available, in the same package as capabilities. And as we always say, for a tango, you need two dancers. So you definitely need those two dancers, but they are separate, in individuals and components. And again, within the CASB world, and CASB can sit on-prem, in the cloud, right, or in a hybrid model. And by the way, do we all know what CASB stands for? Cloud Access Security Broker. Okay, so this is where the proxy pretty much association comes in play, right? But it is a proxy, but not necessarily a proxy, right? So we want to differentiate because there are many other proxies out there. Firewalls or proxies are many other gateways with similar capabilities. But what CASB is, I would say, exclusively focusing on anything that is SaaS model, right? So anything that is cloud application model provided, and it provides visibility into not necessarily the content of what's being trafficked between point A to point B within the cloud. Take an example like S3 buckets. So data that is transferred from a container, on-prem to the S3 bucket within AWS, or it can be Azure, for that reason, Microsoft and so forth, right? 365, someone mentioned here, again, Slack I mentioned earlier, Salesforce and so forth. So you get visibility into what document, right? Or what set of data is being transferred, but not necessarily visibility into data itself. So that's for the privacy that my colleague earlier was talking about earlier here on the call. And it's important to understand the difference, but also it is a disadvantage because myself, I'm a certified ethical hacker, and I will tell you that I have at least 10 ways to go around CASB, right? If you know how to trick it, you trick it. It's that simple. And that's something that we need to take into the account always. As I said, as human error, manipulation, again, documents or files can be encrypted, can be renamed, can be reclassified to what Les was referring earlier about how do you classify things through policies, right? For CASB, CASB at the end of the day is just a machine. So if you tell the machine, hey, anything that is classified as X being sensitive needs to be flagged, then do that. Yeah, but what happens if I reclassify that document or type of data before sending it out, right? So those are challenges. Do not rely automatically and by default on CASB or any system thinking that, okay, this will do the job. The human intervention, the human touch needs to be there. And this is the reason why auditing every once in a while needs to happen, because of that exact reasons, looking into statistics, looking into anomalies and so forth.
Yeah, if I may add to that, what David said, James, actually, I think he touched upon a very key point that, while CASB could be seen as an important layer or an important device in the overall security posture or the protection of data posture, there's no one single silver bullet as such. So to the wider question of, how do you protect data in the cloud? I think, so when companies are looking for protecting the data, you have to look at different layers of putting controls where and how you can protect the data from end to end. So example would be, while proxy is or that layer is important, and it has been a traditional layer at a network layer, traditionally being used in the on-premises environments. In the cloud environment, it is more imperative that it is not seen as like one single way of protecting data. You have to look at like when the data is being stored in the cloud services, how you can actually control the data itself. So there are ways out there on how you can classify the data and actually apply the policies, which could be encryption policies or data access policies, right on the data itself, rather than having a proxy or a broker in between. So you have to look at a more wider picture than just a single way of doing things.
Yeah, can I add a key point, and actually delves into a question that came up earlier, responsibility, right? And you cannot possibly shy off any ownership of, at the end of the day, you're responsible for all your information. So it's important. When I mentioned Casper, I skirted through it, but actually there's a lot of responsibility. Casper is just one, and it's gone further, but you need to be able to classify your data. You need to have good security and privacy hygiene, regardless of GDPR. Those are just names. Most of those are kind of things that are after the fact. Usually the concept is have good hygiene. You should know what data you have. You should be clear about your applications, clear about your data, clear about the architecture and how users, by the way, user identity is a big thing as well, and make a user experience good. So Casper is just one aspect. I've had my say, and we can go into details later, but I'll pass it on.
But one of the things we spoke about earlier, and leading up to these calls, we have questions, and we do some other calls amongst ourselves, and also, you mentioned some things that are some new, right? Some new trends that we're looking in cloud security. All right, I think one of them was SASE, was one of the things you had mentioned previously. So I guess nothing's perfect, right? I mean, it's kind of a layered approach with auditing. Looking at contracts, looking at responsibilities, Casper, but there's also a manual process to this, and some other things, data privacy, good cyber hygiene, right? All of that still builds into the cloud. But what are some of the things that we see that kind of that you talked about that were kind of new, in this area?
Thank you. It's so much. I don't know where to start.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. I mean,
I'm just joking. So before I get going, I just wanted to make a couple of quick remarks about Casper. We know that the cloud providers want to sell you something. Of course, they give you a good price in the beginning, and then you don't know what happens to the pricing. If you put data into the cloud and they want to take it out, you will, in many cases, find that it costs you 10 times more to take the data out. So let's talk for a second about vendor lock-in. I think it comes down to avoid vendor lock-in in stuff that we talk about here. I want to keep the encryption keys, not just for separation of duties and the cloud admin access, breaches, legal actions, compliance. I want to avoid vendor lock-in. I want to be able to have my encryption keys also to move between different providers. And I also want to manage my users. I don't want to have AD in the cloud because that's in Azure, right? Yeah, I want to have my identity management. I want to own it. I want to control it. So it's for both vendor lock-in and separation of duties. And the cloud gateway, what is great, when you decided I don't want the cloud provider to encrypt my data and hold my encryption keys or see my encryption keys, Casper is a middle ground. It's, as we said, it's a proxy, it's a gateway that sits in between the user and the backend. And it's transparent to the client platform. it's transparent to the backend. It's transparent to the SaaS application, Salesforce, or what you have. So it's a very convenient place to enforce security. It could be encryption, it could be access control, it could be some level of monitoring. So okay, let's go over to the trend. What's happening? You mentioned SASY, that SASY. I think Gartner created that term, and it's basically where Casper and other things are coming together. For example, network security, zero trust. What is zero trust? Zero trust came from segmentation, network segmentation, and that is based on validating the user at entrance. But zero trust is saying, well, we need to track the user. It needs to be continuous. So zero trust is basically looking at the behavior of the user. You can view it as a dynamic enforcement of a dynamic security policy. So Casper trusted zero trust, trusted execution environments. They are coming also if we talk about trends in general. So what is a trusted execution environment? We may say, oh, cloud is all software, guests that are sharing infrastructures like hybrids with memory and other resources. So what's happening with trusted execution environments? You get a piece of hardware where you can put your most sensitive stuff. Maybe you want to put encryption keys there instead of an HSM, hardware security module. Maybe you want to do some secret processing in the trusted execution environment, TEE environment. It may not scale. It may be a little bit slower than the full elasticity of a guest. But we are seeing IBM and Microsoft, they already have it, and AWS, they are in a preview now. AWS, the biggest guy, they call it security enclave. So that's an interesting middle ground between an HSM and the Wild West you have in software as a cloud provider, where you don't know who is sitting next to you and what that guy will do to your data. Homomorphic encryption is becoming real. Why do you want homomorphic encryption? You want to be able to encrypt the data, but still operate on the data. So hybrid encryption is used in, for example, if you have a healthcare that want to process your DNA data, you may send them your DNA data, but it's encrypted in a way that it cannot reveal the privacy, cannot expose the privacy, because they can process on the encrypted data. Just use it. Financial institutions, they use homomorphic encryption to share sensitive information between different organizations for fraud analysis, know your customer analysis, and other things. So in general, hybrid environments, hybrid type of encryption, where you use different type of encryption and data de-identification techniques, are becoming more and more important. And standards are slowly coming in that area. In general, the area where you exchange and share sensitive information in a secure way is called secure multi-party computation, and it's becoming more and more interesting. And it's a way of sharing without needing to expose your sensitive data. So a couple of things that are on my mind regarding trends and cloud and sharing data.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to, at this point, Ariel, do we have any questions? Or anything you'd like to add in? The only topic we really haven't delved into and Les kind of touched upon this was IoT, which we can certainly come back to.
Okay, I'm just looking to see which questions we have, and I'm not having an easy time scrolling through them, of course. Okay, here's a question from Ricardo. How has the cloud opened new doors for hackers?
Can anyone take that question?
Yes, please. That would be the
okay.
idea. Thank you.
Yeah, so from what I see, it didn't. It just extended it, right? It didn't really open it, but extended. But maybe just I'll take a half step back, just a little bit to sum what my colleagues here on the panel said, and then link it to the question. I think the big question is, how do we take, right, at least for the participants here, how do we take all this now and do what with it? What is the use case, right, from the hacking perspective? How do we put it in practice and so forth? And it's a lot of theory and a lot of, dots that need to be connected. And I'm old enough to say that through my 20 plus years of experience within this space, on-prem and cloud, think of reference architectures. Anything needs to come into a reference architecture model. I know Vikas on the call here will probably say, yeah, but what is the secure SDLC that Microsoft came up with in the days? What is threat modeling? If anyone is comfortable with Stride, right, which is made by Microsoft and others. So speaking of hacking into the cloud, if you have a solid reference architecture, multi-layered reference architecture, and within those layers, think of data, web interface, web application, the hosting that we talked about earlier, and so forth, right? So those are the layers. Solid reference architecture, a solid threat modeling model in place that can be exercised, and a solid secure SDLC, right? Methodology and process in place. Those are probably the piles for securing data in transit and at rest, right, in the cloud. Anything you do, in fact, not only cloud, but anything you do inside or outside of your network is an extension or reduction or any change will open a new door, right, for hackers. So the overall answer is absolutely yes. They extend a big door or doors within that. On the other hand, keep in mind, many organizations that kept the data on-prem, and on-prem, I mean not necessarily only on their data centers, but extended in different data centers. Before the cloud, we had that co-location model, right? And so that the cage was owned by the service provider while the data was still in the hardware and the software on top of it owned by the organization itself. So the cloud makes the data more secure. It definitely opened or extended some doors, but closed many corners, and it closed many other holes that existed, right, or pre-existed before the cloud. So if I can sum that in one word, an open few and closed many others. The data is, if you know how to, again, if the data, and we can speak to that for hours, right, structured versus unstructured, how's the data traveling, how's the data kept at rest, and so forth. But as I said, if you know how to deal with it, if you have a solid reference architecture, if you have a solid secure SDLC process in place, and you have a solid threat modeling applicable to that data, the cloud is much more secure than anything else.
Yeah, I totally agree with David, actually. So David has summed it very well. The only thing I would say is that as customers are trying to go to the cloud, so there is a transition phase over here. And when that transition is happening, sometimes customers miss this point of having the reference architecture and the threat modeling at that point of time, because there is a transition happening, and it has to translate from whatever they were doing as a best practice or a reference architecture in the on-premises environment, has to be translation done to the cloud world. And sometimes, there could be missed opportunity there that could open some doors at that point of time.
Yeah, I would like to add, yes, and actually these are key points, right? Because I've seen this firsthand. One of the biggest gaps within organizations is not just, it's evident. It's the speed at which things happen in the cloud. And if you've done development, it's infrastructure as code. So servers come up or microservices come up and close. And so there are things coming up at speed. So unless you're a very, very, very strong process-oriented kind of environment with solid references and so on and so forth, it's not going to happen. And especially as applications move to the cloud, they have to be changed as well, because otherwise you go back all the advantage of coming and using the cloud is lost. So what happens, one of the biggest, if I could say anything, is misconfigurations and not reviewing configurations, because you have Caspers, you have these other third parties who are trying to help, but the best ones are the cloud native folks that have stuff. I'm not talking about the small cloud providers. I'm talking about the big ones like Microsoft, Azure, LE Cloud. We use every one of them. The question comes, each of them has their own way and tweaks to mean the same thing or different, and some of them do different things. And if you're not on top of it, if you don't have the skills, it means the people, the proper process and governance around it, and the technology to use it, you're at a loss, because bad folks, black hats, have the same tools, same artificial intelligence, same things as we do. And they'll use the same thing. And they're actually better at sharing than us. I'm done talking.
Yeah, and there's one more aspect here. So we keep talking about the ultimate result of a process, what is cloud related, right? But think of from the DevSecOps perspective. Many of you on the call, you probably are involved in CI, CD, golden pipeline, right? Integration, SaaS, DAST. At the end of the day, cloud is just an enabler, right? In that life cycle. So think of the cloud as an enabler for those security tools, right? So applications that are developed in cloud, so cloud native, right? The level of security, within the code that is being developed within the cloud native today, it's much higher and advanced and enabled, right, by those CI/CD integrations and pipelines than anything else that was developed on-prem before, right? Integration within legacy products and solutions that are not cloud native but are being migrated into the cloud. You can deploy so many solutions within the cloud marketplace today, like Palo Alto, Twistlock, Prisma, I mean, you name it, right? Aqua Security. So for container security, they're being deployed into the cloud and so forth. So overall, the cloud is not only I'll say a hosting or as an infrastructure player, and it's also a huge enabler within the entire life cycle of that product or service development, which makes a big difference.
Yeah, totally agree with that. There comes the point of the standardization and what cloud actually is about. So it learns from many customer situations and essentially drives it in a centralized and a very standardized format.
Great. No, I like the interchange or exchange between everybody. I think this is as a moderator, that's my key. Just so you guys can kick the ball around. Ilf's calling football right now here. We got like 2 minutes before the end of the game. I don't know if you can score a goal here.
I'll be quick. So how did cloud change things? Number one, it's a big pile of data. And the data is becoming more and more sensitive. It used to be payment data, but now PII, your personal data, is becoming more and more a target. That's where the criminals can get a gain. And thirdly, security in cloud is not mature. It's immature. They are all learning on the job. if you compare to third-party security providers, cloud, they are catching up. Sometimes they just charge you 10% of what you pay for something on-prem. So there's a kind of a business incentive there. I think the big issue is the gap in responsibility, the understanding. The customers assume that, oh, the cloud provider will take care of the security. No, you need to go and verify. That's a big confusion. And all that data, is it accessible to the administrators of the cloud? And we kind of talked about that before. And now we are seeing ransomware as a service. Easy, not expensive, pay as you go. So yeah, cloud is changing the security landscape in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Ariel, we've got about a minute left.
Yes, hi, everybody. Ulf, David, Vikas, and Les, thank you all so much. This has been a great session. I'm really, really happy that you've all joined us today. So any final thoughts, quick and sweet from David?
Yeah, if I can again sum all this together, go to cloud. and I'll say security is always the last that comes in place when it comes to the business. Well, make sure that you have a well documented what I call the risk acceptance form. When anything is moved to the cloud, you want to make sure that visibility exists, and also that the liability is not on the security folks, but on whoever manages that cloud account, because obviously we're not managing, right, the security folks, somebody else is managing. So make sure you have risk acceptance process and forms in place.
Thank you. And Vikas, would you like to leave us with something, some thoughts?
Yeah. So, over a number of years, I've seen the nature of customers who have been going to the cloud change quite a lot. We have more and more regulated customers, more, I would say, customers who are more tough. Adopting cloud, going to the cloud, I think it becomes very important for them to be able to assess and be able to make their determination. It all comes down to their risk assessments. And as long as the customers have the right risk methodologies, risk assessment methodologies, and they can apply towards going to the cloud, that would help them adopt it and take advantage of whatever cloud brings to them.
Thank you. And then Les, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yes, just a quick thing. I would say, yeah, I agree with all the risk parts. But as Ulf mentioned, it's important to actually know what you have and take ownership and good hygiene for security, privacy, because nothing's going to change. It's just going to get even worse if you expose it externally, because there's an assumption, and people assume that the cloud provider or any provider is going to protect you, and they're not. They never. So you got. At the end of the day, it's your own safety that you got to take care of. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. This recording is going to be available, of course, online for you to share with your colleagues and peers. We'll be posting that up shortly and sending it all to everyone. And all of you that are on our cloud committee, thank you for your support and your work that we've been doing. We anticipate having our cloud course sometime in 2021. And a lot of the things that we covered today are going to be covered in that course. So Jim, thank you for hosting as moderator. As always, a pleasure. And everyone have a great week. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.